Yeah, let's start. Hello, everyone. Salam, Adab, Namaste, and welcome at Indian Diaspora, Washington, D.C. Today, we are going to hear Professor Anisur Rahman Saab, who is a literary critic, translator, and bilingual poet in Urdu and English. He was professor and head of English department at Jamia Millia Islamia. He has written multiple books, but today we are going to talk on two of his books, Hazaro Khwaishein Aisi and Hazar Rang Shairi. So the title is What Lies Between Mirrors, 5 Centuries of Urdu Poetry, English Translation. Usually I don't give a formal introduction, but I couldn't find a very right person within a short time. So I took upon myself for this brief formal introduction. And in fact, I was helped by the speaker himself. Well, as I said, he's a professor of English, but he has written wonderfully in Urdu. And his two books we have two books to talk about today, Hazaro Khwaishein Aisi, the wonderful word of Urdu Ghazal, and the second one, Hazar Rang Shairi, the wonderful word of Urdu Nazm. In the first one, Hazaro Khwaishein Aisi, he has covered almost 130 ghazal by 65 poets. They represent 7 literary periods with their rich fare of style and ideas. And the Hazar Rang Shairi puts together 140 nazm by 70 poets. And that showcases the evolution of all of its forms, right from the root in Deccan to various geography across South Asia. And these books have been reviewed and received rave reviews. And we have 2 of those scholars, which I am going to read their comments. One from Carlo Coppola. Anisur Rahman brings us literally and metaphorically to Hazar Rang Shairi, the first comprehensive selection of Urdu poetry in English translation. And Coppola is a professor emeritus of Hindi Urdu and at Auckland University. The second one comes from Amina Yaqeen, and she writes, the Nazm, with its highly intricate varieties, voices, variations, and vicissitudes, is a profound poetic form with a fascinating history. Compiled comprehensively for the first time, this collection presents the best of Urdu Nazm from the 16th century to now. And these 2 books are published by HarperCollins. It is available for you all. So I welcome you all and all the 3 speakers. One of the speakers is Professor Dr. Rizwan Ahmed, who is an associate professor, Department of English, Literature and Linguistics at University of Muscat, I believe. I cannot see the poster. Qatar, sorry. And the other one is our own Dr. Mozam Siddiqui Saab from Washington, D.C. Probably he doesn't need any introduction anymore. So welcome you all. And now I welcome Professor Anisur Rahman Saab to initiate the talk.
Thank you, Razi Sahab. Many thanks to you. In fact, it was me who asked you to do this instead of finding someone to introduce and to start this event. So you have in a way summed up what I was going to say in any case, but thanks for doing that. I would be rather brief in making my presentation because I think I should give some more time to the speakers. 2 distinguished discussants are here, and some of the members of the audience would also like to interact with questions and make comments. That's why I think I should be brief and will bring to you some of the major highlights of the book so that you can have an idea of what it's all about. Friends, I owe these 2 books to my academic engagements and to my academic preferences that I have had over 4 decades in the university system as a faculty. I taught mostly poetry, as I was naturally inclined towards poetry. I taught British literature, British poetry, American poetry, post-colonial poetry from different locations. and also translation theory and practice. And I publish in these areas precisely. That is what I have been doing. And that is how this book also relates to the discipline that I have been pursuing. I realized that in a multilingual location like ours, multilingual and multicultural location like ours, literature could best be understood and appreciated in terms of comparative studies. That is one of the reasons that I would like to advance and put before you. And this brought me quite naturally to translation studies, to comparative studies, and to Urdu studies to add to that. Urdu being my mother tongue, and Persian a partly acquired language, which I started learning at the school stage and later after I finished my university education at two different stages in my life. So that is how I learned this language. My classroom experience helped me further to develop my moorings as a faculty and as a translator, so to say. So while teaching the 17th century metaphysical poets like John Donne, for example, I was suddenly reminded of Ghalib, especially for the wit and for the conceit that both of these poets use. So I was wondering if there are so many, and there are many more I understand, who could be personally talked about when I talk to my students in this class. Like, for example, again, another example comes to mind of the poetry, British poetry of the 30s. So when I was doing that, I was suddenly reminded of the progressive writers and the progressive poets in the Urdu language. So that is how one evolved, and that is how the evolution took place, and I further came towards this whole profession, whole vocation. This brought me to explore how much of Urdu poetry was actually translated into English. So I started preparing a bibliography for this purpose, and I found around 170 titles. These titles related basically with poets, individual poets, and some collections of select poets, but I didn't find any collection in any book or any form of a comprehensive nature which could give me an idea of how Urdu poetry, right from the very beginning in the 16th century to now, has been put together. So that acted as a propeller, and I thought this is one thing that I should be doing. And I started working on that slowly, and it took me very long to finish that project and to put these things together. This brought me to this kind of bibliography, and this bibliography helped me a lot to move forward. And this was a very protracted process, very slow process. It took very long to put all these things together so that I could develop my own, find my own route and try to walk on that route. When I thought of putting together the Ghazal anthology and the Nazm anthology, after that, I thought that my first job was to look at the selection and the scheme of the book. So I scanned the history of Urdu poetry right from the beginning to now to find out who these poets are, who made experiments in the language, or in other words, chastened the language, and who also gave respect, made the form respectable, and those who became a part of the canon. And that is how I thought that probably I would like to make a list of such poets who experimented with the language and with the form and finally became a part of the canon. So I periodized them in historical terms so that I could move forward and to be able to prepare a list of my own and to start my work for putting together an anthology of Ghazals first, and after that, Nazms. I began first with the Ghazal anthology, and in this book, as Razi Sahab has already told you, that there are 65 poets and there are 7 sections: metaphysical beginnings towards enlightenment, romance of realism, advent of modernism, progressive poetics, new poetics, and beyond new poetics. Each section has a general introduction followed by individual introduction to poets, which are brief introductions, not exceeding a page. In the introduction of the book, what I did, I traced the trajectory of the Ghazal from the mid-6th century of Arabia and how it traveled from there to Persia and finally going to various locations and coming to India, coming to Urdu. That was a very interesting trajectory to trace and to find my own way of reaching the Ghazal and how I could lay my hands upon, if at all I wanted to translate. But the problem was that Ghazal was, and as I understand, and we all know, it's a world of strange mysteries and rare delights. It entices you a lot, and it's so epigrammatic, it is so pithy, it is so precise, but at the same time, it is so musical that it holds you, and you can't disengage. Faraq rightly said that Ghazal is a series of climaxes. ये तसलसल है, Intihaon ka tasalsul, wonderfully said. Each couplet is a kind of a climax that you reach, and then you reach to another couplet. So how did I do this? This was a very difficult task that I thought that I was going to take upon myself, and it was not an easy thing to do so. So what I did, that I developed my own design, though I knew that it was very difficult, because there was a qafi and radif in ghazal, that there was a certain meter in the ghazal, that there was a certain line length in the ghazal, there was a metrical order in the ghazal. So I also developed my own process of doing that. So what I did, that I developed my own metrical pattern, I developed my own rhythm and rhyme for the ghazals that I had selected, and I thought that I should first determine my line length. And therefore, I counted my syllables and always thought that let the syllables be under control, so that my music and my rhythm also is under control, and I pass it on to my reader. So that the auditory imagination is at work. As I listen to those lines, let my readers also listen to those lines. So that is how it all started. In many of the ghazals, if you lay your hands upon this book, you will see that there are qafi and radif that I have tried to maintain. But wherever it has not been possible, what I have done, I have tried to create a kind of musical condition in each share. I will not say couplet, because couplet is different from a share. So I try to do that rhythmic order, that musical design that the ghazal is all about. That is what I was doing for the ghazal book. After that, when I came to Hazar and Shairi, this again has 70 poets, not 65 as the earlier one. It has 70 poets, and there are 6 sections in this book also, making a tradition towards modernism, progressive poetics, new poetics, beyond new poetics, and womanist/feminist poetics. Each section has a general introduction, just like the earlier book, also followed by an introduction, a brief introduction of the poets that I was engaging with. I understand that a translator just doesn't translate the text. He also supplements glosses and provides a kind of a background for the reader to engage with who he was reading or she was reading, to be able to place, to locate that author, that poet. So that is what I was trying to do. In the introduction to this book also, like the earlier book, what I did, I marked the kinds of nazm that we have in hand. And I found 18 kinds of nazm from thematic perspective. That is the religious representations, which included hamd, munajat, naat, manqabat, marsiya, noha, salam, and soos. Then there were poems of very secular representations like Madha, Masnavi, Qasida, and Shahr-e-Ashur. And thirdly, I could lay my hands upon the cultural representations that these novels really had projected. And in this category, I put together Geet, Qawwali, Sehra, Hajm, Vasukh, and Reqi. So I tried to capture, tried to list, and tried to bring together all these forms of Urdu nazm so that a reader could lay hands. Naturally, I had to make my own selections, which I did. And this is what I'm talking about, the introduction to this book. Now, from the metrical perspective, I also marked that there are 13 kinds of nazm, doha, and doha you also include there, and musaddas, and musallas, and murabba, and muhammas, and musamman, and musammat, and rubai, and qita, and mustazad, and tazmeen, and sonnet, and haiku. So lots of things that I had before me, a tall order that I was trying to accept and trying to negotiate with. In addition, I discussed the diversity of the forms, that is Paband Nazm, that is the regulated poem. I translate it as a regulated poem. Then Morra, blank verse poem, the Azad Nazm, the free verse poem, and the Nasri Nazm, which is the prose poem, which is so much popular today. And wonderful poems have come to us from this Nasri Nazm platform. In its classical poetry, I found was very cultivated, very metrically structured. But the modernist poetry was marked by freedom of the form and freedom of the meter, and that is how this Morra, and that is how this kind of Azad Nazm and the Nasri Nazm came into being. Just towards the end, I would like to say that all of us in a multicultural and multilingual society are essentially translators. This is one thesis which I have been talking about at places, that multilinguals are translators essentially. When we speak, we do often resort to one language from one language to another language. That is how we make sense sometimes. And sometimes we are not in the position to make sense because our equivalents don't really work. So we are translators essentially when we talk from one language to another. Rizwan Saab would tell better about this kind of a phenomenon that takes place and how linguistic interaction really does matter to us. So my teaching of literature in English was a very limiting experience, friends, let me tell you, because I was engaging only the British and the American and colonial poets. But when I came to this, I looked at the comparative perspective and look at the, as a practitioner, as a theorist of comparative and as well as translation studies, and being myself a practicing poet both in English and Urdu. That is how I just started looking at my own methodology of putting my translations into order. I realized that the translation theory helped me a lot. It gave me a framework, and my own practice as a poet gave me a framework to follow. We have, I would like to stop here to be able to give more time to the distinguished panelists here, because they definitely have comments to make and questions to ask to me. And also, I would like to spare time so that more of the members of this collective here can also respond and can also put questions to me, which I'll be very happy to answer. Thank you, Razi Saab. Thank you, Rizwan Saab. Thank you, Muslim Saab, and friends here. I pass it on to you.
Anisur,
Yes.
you invite one of the discussions. It will be
Okay.
on you. Yeah.
Fine. If time permits, if at all we have time towards the end, I will also read out some of the translations. That is just kind of an appendix to what I said. Muslim Sahib, may I request you to kindly come forward and make your observations and put questions to me that you have, and followed by that is Professor Rizwan Ahmed. So Muslim Sahib.
Thank you, Professor Anisur Rahman. So it is indeed a very opportune moment for the Indian diaspora that we have the good opportunity of launching a runumai of the two books written by Professor Anisur Rahman. And these books have not been formally released as yet. So Indian diaspora is very fortunate in having access to these books in the PDF format. And that's how we were able to go over these two books. And I would say that Professor Anisur Rahman is uniquely qualified to write such a book, because he is thoroughly anchored not only in the tradition of Urdu poetry, which, as he said, is his native language, but he is equally anchored in the tradition of English literature, English poetry, and also Persian poetry, and I would say to a limited extent of the Arabic poetry. So having the multi-linguistic background qualifies him to write such a book. And these two books cover together the entire history of Urdu poetry, the 500 period plus 500 period of Urdu poetry. And as Professor Anisur Rahman himself briefly pointed out, discussing all the genres used in Urdu poetry, the meters and all kinds of things, which are borrowed largely from Arabic by way of Persian, and Persian meters, as well as also the Indian meters. So you will really enjoy and have a thorough knowledge after reading these two books about the Urdu poetry, and all the things that you were afraid to ask about will be revealed to you when you read these two books. And as he himself has said, the first book, Hazaro Khwahishein Aisi, the title obviously has been taken from Ghalib's, one of the most famous ghazals, and also Hazar Rang. So Hazar is common in the title of both these books. And the first book dwells into the history of Urdu ghazal, starting with Quli Qutub Shah and going all the way down to the modern ghazal writing poets. And the second book deals with the history of Urdu poetry or Urdu Nazm. So in the terminology of Urdu poetry, Nazm is used to describe the word poetry, poem, all kinds, all genres. And then nazm is used also to denote what we call modern poetry, modern verse. And also nazm includes ghazal and all kinds of genres that Professor Anisur Rahman briefly referred to. And this is probably, as I said, the first book, because there have been other books written on the history of Urdu poetry. The one that comes to mind among the earlier ones is the book written by Professor, so pardon me for these memory lapses. I think it was, it will come back to me. And
Yeah, sure.
then we also have books written by Anisur. So I'm having these.
Doesn't matter.
And so I think I would ask Professor
Yes,
Rizwan Ahmad if he would, take over, and I will join in as we proceed.
okay, Rizwan Saab.
Gigi, thank you very much. Actually, I want to start with a confession that I'm really a student of literature. I'm very low level. I'm a person who mostly focuses on language. I'm a linguist. So oftentimes I'll call myself beadab, or yahan pe I'm bazuban but beadab. But I am in front of all the people who are really deep into literature than I am. I do read poetry for my own, personal, spiritual, academic and intellectual curiosities. And I'm a great fan of Urdu poetry. I mean, I'm multilingual, as Professor Anisur Rahman Sahab said earlier. So I speak English, I teach in English, but for some reason I haven't been able to appreciate and really enjoy English poetry. It's my own biasness, but so I'm going to be basically talking about some. So I have hazaron questions and
Welcome.
and points and things that I want to learn from Anis Sahab. And I'm going to start with some of them because I think this is an opportunity. And the reason I'm asking some of these questions is also because a lot of people who are with us today, they might have those questions in their minds as well. So I'm going to start with a very simple point, is that, all namings are ideological, names of individuals, names of cities. And coming from India, we all know how much ideologically charged naming is. Names have been changed, names have been dropped, and so on and so forth. So my first question is that both of your books have two-part names. The first part is in Urdu. One, as Muazzam Sahab said, taken from a share of Ghalib. The second one also has the Urdu part, and the second part of each name has sort of the description in English. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about why you chose names that sort of combine an Urdu and English together in the title. And that, I think, is very fascinating. And I just want to know what your thoughts were when you thought. I mean, as a linguist, I have my own thoughts about these, but I want to hear from you before I say.
Yes, I do appreciate what you are saying. This is a very interesting question that you have put forward. Muazzam Sahib has already referred to Ghalib. That very famous share of Ghalib is here on the third page of the book with which this begins. We all know what that share is. हजारों ख्वाहिशें ऐसी कि हर ख्वाहिश पे दम निकले, बहुत निकले मेरे अरमान लेकिन फिर भी कम निकले. This was the ghazal book, and I thought that each ghazal is a khwahish, is a kind of a desire. So that is why I put this at the very beginning of this book, and I translated this: desires in thousands I had, for each I would die. With many I had luck, for many I would sigh. Why I did this? This was on the third page of the book, and when this book, and the first, let me tell you that the first title that I had thought of was 1,000 Desires, The Wonderful World of Urdu Ghazals.
Yeah.
But later it occurred to me and also to the publisher, why not go to the original word there, original phrase there, Hazaro Khwahish Aisi. Now, as a linguist, as one sub, you know better that this is the time of linguistic intermixing. Lots of fiction writers and in poetry, you see that there are words coming from other languages. And I understand this is also a typical post-colonial call. We no longer explain ourselves. So in translation studies, there came a time that you don't need to explain what a dupatta is, what a roti is. It's not a leaven bread, something different. So it's an effort to let others explore for themselves what it is and what this actually means. Because as a student of literature, English literature, I also found in criticism and also in poetry that a lot of Latin words were used. So it occurred to me, why not use these words and in a way kind of incorporate or broaden the frontiers of appeal? And this was very magical. So when we thought, I and the publisher both agreed on this, and we thought of it, it really mattered a lot and really appealed to many people who came to know about this. And to tell you, it really clicked the market as well. So there was a market perspective as well, which is not the primary perspective and primary, say, intention. So this linguistic intermixing is a call that most of the post-colonialist students and others have been also engaging with, and you also as a linguist know better than me. So it was basically broadening the frontiers of appeal. That is what brought me to. And the subtitle is there. So there was a mixing here. So Hazaro Khwahish Aisi, The Wonderful World of Urdu Ghazal. Then when the second book comes, so it naturally one thought of Hazaro once again. So Hazar Rang Shari was the most appropriate title that came to my mind. But the earlier title that came to my mind was A Garden of All Senses. But then a better title to me and to my publisher appeared to be Hazar Rang Shari. And again, a subtitle, A Wonderful World of the Urdu. So what happens here that there is a linguistic intermixing. The titles come from two languages and they make sense to me as they make sense to readers, because many readers have written to me that this works very, very well. This was my response to what you said about the title of the book.
Yeah,
Yes,
thank you very
please.
much. I mean, I think honestly, the title of the book goes very well along with the book itself, because the book
Yes.
itself creates a world
Yeah.
combining two different worlds. So in that sense, the title represents very faithfully what the rest of the book is about. So thank you very much. My second question is kind of related to this, is that who do you think is your audience? Because many of the choices that you have made while compiling the book, and even when you are translating different genres of poetry, I think has been based on keeping a certain type of audience in mind. Of course, you have thought through it, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about who they are, and
The
one
choice of
example
words.
that who your audience was, and one very clear sign of that, which I found in the book, is that the original text is not written in the Urdu script. It's been transliterated into Roman, and that of course has it links with who you think your audience is. It links with the title that we just talked about. It links probably with the theme of the book itself. If you could elaborate a little bit on that.
Right. It's a very interesting question once again. When I started this project, the reader or who I was going to address was not Nick Galshan. I was not at all aware of that. I didn't think about that at all. I was trying to look at those texts which I thought were good texts. And those texts deserved attention and deserved translation and deserved to be included in the book. So that was my first criterion. Then came the second problem, the second issue. The second issue was, does that text lend itself to me as a translator? Am I capable enough to do that? So that was another very important call for me. Like, for example, let me give you one example by name, that there is a very important poet, Shafiq Fatma Shera. I tried to translate her, but I found that it was not possible for me probably to translate that. In the audience, I have a friend here who has translated Shafiq Fatma, though I find it's very difficult to translate. Riyaz is here, Riyaz can tell better when the question comes. So the second point is that translatability was my important. Then I was not looking for the popular ghazal, but it so happened that some of the ghazals and some of the nazms are very popular ones. That is just by chance, or that is a kind of a coincidence. So my intention was to choose the quality text, quality within quotes, in the sense that how it matters to me as a literary text. And then who is my author, as you say, who is my listener, who is my reader, irrespective of who this. It could be a student, it could be a researcher, it could be a popular reader of poetry, because one of the aims of a translator is also to reach out to those who do not accept your work in the first hand or immediately, instantly. There are many shades in Ghalib which you don't immediately understand, but when you look at it, go deeper into it, you realize what a magic. So my idea was to bring such texts also to the fore, which were not very easily understandable in the very first instance, but maybe at some point of time, the reader would be able to unfold the magic of that text. So these were some of the thoughts. But no, of course, the popular appeal was not at all my intention. Selections were on the value and the merit of the text and the translatability. That is very important for me. If I lay my hands upon a text which I can't manage, it's no fun translating that. So I thought, let me choose those texts which alone I can lay my hands upon with some amount of confidence. Well, one cannot say if one has done the justice and is it possible at all, because translation, as it is very rightly said, is finally an abundant exercise. This far and no further, you can't improve it any further. Therefore, you stop one day. But it's very interesting to look at your own work later and find that, oh, ye lafz to shayad zyada acha hota. Probably this word could have been a better word. But that happens with the creative writing as well, because the creative writers also come to realize later. So you have in the colleges, notes in the books that he used to take often, that he wrote about these kind of alternatives that the words could be. So that is my basic response to this, what we have said about the transliteration, as you also mentioned. Yes, transliteration was there because I wanted also the reader to look at it, not in Urdu, because after all, if I was giving it in Urdu, that is in the Persian script, who was I going to address? So my intention was to give it in Roman so that anyone could read it, and also to acclimatize himself, herself with that language, to be able to relate it with the translation that I was doing. Briefly, that is what I wanted to say about it.
Muazzam Saab, aana chahenge?
So actually, when I was going through these books, I found the most amazing thing was the amount of translations of the poems, because if you compare your book with the other ones, the ones that come to mind, Ram Babu Saxena, very, not as comprehensive, then Ralph Russell and Khurshid Islam, and then Jamil Jalabi, who has in 4 volumes the discussion of Urdu poetry, poets, and translation. But the distinguishing feature of both these books of yours is the amount of poems translated. And this is the first book, I think, discussing the history of Urdu poetry, which contains the largest amount of translation of Urdu poetry in it. And you have mentioned some of the points that you had to deal with while translating these poems from English into Urdu. And so when you were translating, Professor Rizwan Ahmed has already asked you about who were your audience, because right now we are living in an age where the majority of the populations are in the age bracket of under 40 or under 30. So the same applies to Urdu readers. So when you were translating these poems, did you have the young generation in mind, or were you aiming your translation mostly for people who were 30 plus and, in that age bracket?
Muslim Saab, actually, I didn't have that in mind. I didn't think of the age group or the kind of audience or the reader that my book was aimed at. I was doing my work, trying to collect or trying to choose such texts which I could lay my hands upon with some amount of confidence. One can't say for sure if that confidence is good enough to engage with in a text like this that I was trying to develop. But it was a book which was according to my selection, because many people have also put me this question earlier in the interviews, that I had to give. That you have left this, and you haven't included that, and how do you justify that? No selection can ever be complete into itself, can't satisfy everyone. So the personal choice always comes into consideration. The poets whom I thought were because I said in the beginning that there were two considerations before me. One is that how does a poet perfect that form? I chose him, picked him out from the stock. And the second, how does he chasten the language, the idiom, as Malame said, the dialect of the tribe. This is what the poet tries to chasten the language, the dialect of the tribe. So that is what I was trying to do, irrespective of who is going to read. Naturally, when you pass it on to a reader, the reader also has to put in some effort. Maybe it is something which a reader might not like at the first instance, but with a little bit of labor put into it, might be in a position to lay hands with some amount of confidence. This is expecting too much of a reader, and this is giving too much of a concession to one's own self, thinking that probably my work will be acceptable. So I basically was trying to develop a kind of a condition. I was conditioning myself to the text that I was trying to translate. And I was also trying to condition the reader at the same time, so that the reader is also trained to read that, to be able to appreciate that. Well, this is something which is being very presumptuous while saying that. But I was trying to do and to develop a manuscript which made sense. And because the first book, which received very rave reviews, and the second has received 3 reviews so far, and more interviews, things are coming. So broadly speaking, it has been well accepted. That makes me happy, but I don't know really if I have really been able to achieve the task that I had set for myself before me. But the reader, of course, is a very important part of the whole business. And but the reader, if you have the reader in mind, probably you create a bias in the beginning. So I didn't have the reader in mind. I had the text in mind, the quality in mind, translatability in mind.
Anisur, we have
Yes.
about 40 minutes. So
Yes, please.
You have to switch to the second part, I guess, just to
So,
Uh,
may I
the second book or second part, because we
40.
have already 40 minutes covered.
Okay. So what would you like to do?
You have to cover both. So
So
I'll
I
ask
can,
you.
just as I said, if the questions from the two distinguished speakers are over, then I can read out, if you like, some of the translations, so that you can have an idea of what I was trying to do and what I have said. Does it complement? So, Agar Rizwan Saab, if you have anything more to say.
I think the way I read both of them, and I wanted to not really do it separately. So my questions are sort of broad enough that cover both of those. One question that I think I would like to ask you is that in Hazaron Khaishe, the original Urdu text and the English translation appear on this, one after another in the same section, whereas in the Hazarang Shairi, you have placed the at the end. Now, both of them have their own merits. Could you tell us a little bit about what the reason?
It happened so because in the Ghazal anthology, what was happening, that the parallel texts were going, and the copy, say, those who were setting the text on the page finally for publication, for printing, they were in a position to manage that. But in the case of Nazm, it couldn't be possible for them, because they said that the line lengths go on to the other page. So the parallel text is not being possible. And if they did it like this, the book was going to run into 700 pages. And the publisher said it's not a good idea to have a book of 700 pages. So that is why they took it towards the end of the book. And that is how it is.
But a good thing of that is that, which is actually something that I liked, is that then people can focus on the translation as a new form of creative piece, rather than seeing it as a derivative of the Urdu text that is sitting on the same page.
Rightly
so in
marked,
a way,
rightly.
Yeah, so in a way, and actually, I do not like when a lot of people when reading a translated piece of literature or poetry, especially, they start picking up on every single word and say, oh, no, this is not the right translation of it. This should have been done like this, or it misses this, or it misses that. I think
Yes.
people who have that sort of an attitude, they miss the entire purpose of translation.
Exactly. You are very right, because that takes your attention away from the translation, and you
Yeah.
keep on comparing the words and the phrases. But the advantage in the second book is this, that the poems stand here on their own.
Yes.
So you like the poem or you don't like the poem, but the poem is there for you. Now, if you are more curious to know about what the text was, then you go to the pages towards the end of the book, which is about 150 pages or so. So that helps me to let the poem, my translation, stand on its own,
Yes.
and allows that space to the author, to the reader as well, who can read it as an independent text. So that I found it to be an advantage, to be a plus point.
Yeah.
Now, Razi Saab, if, as I said in the beginning, that it would be incomplete, and if you allow, and one can read some of the examples so that you have a broader idea of what this whole book trying to do and what I have been able to do. Shall I read out some of the examples?
It's all up to you. You can,
Yes.
your session can go up to 12:20 or 12:15.
DJ
After
Saab.
that, the question is okay.
Okay, now I'm going to read some of the ghazals from, or some say shares from his first book, Ghazal. And I begin with Quli Qutub Shah. The first ghazal in this book is very famous one. I will read the Urdu and then I will read the English. And it is here in this translation, you will find that the qafiya radif, the syllable count, the line length are all maintained. And that is how I begin it. Piya Baj, Pyala, Piya Jaina. Priyabaj yaktil jiya jai. I can't ever drink my drink without my love. I can't ever breathe. I sink without my love. The second share is Kahi the piya bin suburi karum. Kahiya jai amma, kiya jai na. I should be patient, you say, without my love. How unfair. I can't even blink without my love. The third share is Nahi ishq jismo bada khoo hai. Kadhi usse milne siya jaye. And my translation goes, a bore indeed is one who can't be in love. I'm no bore. I'm on the brink without my love. And the last share is, Qutub shahne de muj diwani kupan. Diwani ko pushpan diya jaye na. No counsels Qutub Shah done to this crazy one. I'm the one I can't even think without my love. I read it so that you can see what was the methodology I tried to adopt. So you have without my love, without my love, without my love, repeated 4 times as radifs. And you have sing, blink, brink, and think, qafiya. And you have the same line length, same syllable count that goes with the English translation. So there is no variation. It comes close to the text that I had in hand and how I tried to negotiate with that. That was the first example that I tried to bring to you. Some very interesting examples I have marked for you. This is Siraj Aurangabadi, one of my most favorite poets. One could have chosen the most famous ghazal by Siraj, as I said, Khabare Tahayyure Ishq Sun. But is it manageable? Can I ever lay my hands upon that most difficult? Though this is one of the finest ghazals that Urdu capital, one of the most important capitals of the poetry. No, I couldn't do that. So I have interesting ghazal here, just 2-3 examples I will read from there. Sher se, जानो दिल सी मैं गिरफ्तार हूँ किनका उनका बंदे बेजरो दीनार हूँ किनका उनका I am a prisoner by heart and soul of whom? Only him. The worthless being of no riches of whom? Only him. So I try to maintain that kind of rhythm that comes in the original and how it echoes in the translation. सब्र के बाग के मंडवे से झड़े जो फूल अब तो लाचार गले हार हूं किनका उनका like a flower fallen from the bar of patience now I am helpless garland of whom only him And one more share I'll read from there. हौज़े कौसर का नहीं चाह जहन्ना की कसम, तश्ने शरबते दीदार हूँ किनका उनका. I don't wish for the river of paradise, I swear. I only crave for the kind look of whom, only him. So what I did here, I was trying to play on this word of whom, only him, to create that kind of drama that Siraj was trying to play upon. Kinka, unka. So the magic of this, the merit, if at all, I can say for myself. So I tried to play on that and see how it really worked for me. And I thought that probably that was something that I could not improve any further, and I stopped there. Few more examples I'll read. This is बात करनी मुझे मुश्किल कभी ऐसी तो जफर अब जैसी तेरी महफिल कभी ऐसी कभी. It was never so very hard to speak, but now. Your assembly was never so bleak, but now. Here also I'm trying to maintain काफिया. ले गया छीन के कौन आज तेरा सब्र करार, ले गया छीन के यूं कौन तेरा सब्र करार, बेकरारी तुझे ए दिल कभी ऐसी तो न थी. Who robbed you of your patience, my poor heart, never so restless and never so meek, but now. So but now, and then bleak, meek, seek, oblique, etc. That goes for the Qafiya. And the rhythm. My take, Francis will correct me if not right, my take is that in translating Urdu poetry, rhythm plays a very important role. So if you are in a position to imitate that, I'm not saying translate, I'm trying using Dryden's phrase. If you are trying to imitate that rhythm, you are partly successful in doing your job that you have taken yourself. That is what I would. कुछ और सुनाएंगे आपको, उसके बाद कुछ नज़में सुनाऊंगा, so that एक आपको अंदाजा हो जाए कि क्या मैं कर रहा था. कितना वक्त है रदी साहब? 20 मिनट. Then we will leave some time for the audience also. दाग. Let's listen to दाग 2-3 shares. उज़्र आने में भी है और बुलाते भी नहीं, बासे तरके मुलाकात बताते भी नहीं. She has a plea for not coming, don't call me either, doesn't call me either, but her reasons for not coming doesn't tell me either. So that is how it goes. Tell me either, leave me either, sleep me either, sleepy, not sleepy, so either. That is how it goes. That is a very famous ghazal by Da. I come down to the later poets, and this is एक बहुत अहम ghazal है ये, और I will just read फिराक गोरखपुरी. This is फिराक गोरखपुरी. रात भी नींद भी कहानी, हाय क्या चीज है जवानी. A night, a slumber, a tale too. Pure bliss, bubbly life, ale too. एक पैगाम जिंदगानी भी, आशिकी मर्गे ना कहानी. Love, the message of life, but it was a something that's ale too. So ale too, veil too, veil too. That is on. I come to some of the examples from the later poets. I go to say Ahmad Faraz, for example. जिस समत भी देखूं नजर आता है कि तुम हो, ऐ जाने जहां ये कोई तुम सा है तुम हो. Wherever I look, I see only you. Love is that one like you are only you. एक ख्वाब है, खुशबू है कि झोंका है कि पल है, एक धुंध है, ये धुंध है, बादल है कि साया है कि तुम हो. A dream, a fragrance, a whiff of air, a moment, some mist or cloud or reflection, or only you. I go to leave lots of them, and I go to one of the very important poets that I personally like a lot, and that is Zishan Sahil. Let me read out Zishan Sahil, and I hope I can read as well. Just a minute, please. Excuse me. Yes, Zishan Sahil comes here. This is a wonderful poet of ghazal and nazm both. याद करने के ज़माने से बहुत. Now look at this tone and tenor of this one. याद करने के जमाने से बहुत आगे हैं, आज हम अपने ठिकाने से बहुत आगे हैं. I'm far beyond the age of recalling, far beyond my abode today, far beyond. So you don't find that kind of kafiya deep here, but the rhythm that I've tried to copy and to maintain. कोई आकर हमें ढूंढेगा तो खो जाएगा, हम नए गम में पुराने से बहुत आगे. कोई आएगा तो कोई आकर हमें ढूंढेगा तो खो जाएगा. Look at the शेर, हम नए गम में पुराने से बहुत आगे हैं. Whosoever comes to look for me will now get lost. In new sorrows, I'm far beyond the old ones, far beyond. And third शेर I will read also. जिस्म बाकी है मगर जाके मिटाने वाले, रूह में जख्म निशाने से बहुत आगे हैं. The body lives on, but the plunderers of my soul should know. Wounds in the soul are far beyond, targets far beyond. So I try to develop that kind of a, say, सरे आवाज जिसको आप कह सकते हैं, और उस पे मैं खेल रहा था और कोशिश कर रहा था कि वो करूं. एक आध चीज और सुना देता हूं आपको नज़मों से. तो आप देखिए नज़मों से सुना दूं. ऐसे पहली, the first poem in this, it begins, this नज़्म book begins with a hamd is a hymn to God. चंद्र सूर तेरे नूर थे, निस दिन को नूरानी किया, तेरी सिफत किन कर सके, तू आप ही है मेरा जिया. The moon and the sun bear your glow. Your glow turns the dark night into day. None can ever be as you are, all life and soul to this man of clay. The difference you will find here, that the share is of 2 lines, but here my translation runs into 4, because that is how I could manage the rhythm, I could manage the transmission of the meaning. तुझ नाम मुझ आराम है, जीव सो तुझ काम है, सब जग को तुझसो काम है, तुझ नाम जप माला हुआ. Only your name brings me comfort. In comfort, I offer my life to you. I repeat your name, you are my rosary. Give all praise to you as I do. So that rhythm I tried to maintain through, so that I could see how really it works for me. Now, एक बहुत interesting चीज आपको सुनाना चाहता हूँ. This is very interesting. Mirza Muhammad Rafi Sauda. Sauda is known for qasidas, but I chose something riddles. उन्होंने कुछ पहेलियां भी लिखी. अब आपसे पूछता हूँ, आप समझ के देखें कि ये कौन सी पहेली. कि एक पहेली है. एक तार वो छैल, एक नार वो छैल छबीली, लोगों से वो अड़ती है. रवि साहब, एक नार वो छैल छबीली, लोगों से वो अड़ती है, ऊपर अपने मर्द चढ़ावे, मर्दों पर वो चढ़ती है. And my translation is, a woman so foppish, she likes tiffs with men, allows men to climb on her, then climbs on men. और आप देखें कि ये कौन सी पहेली है. ये पहेली है पालकी. पालकी. एक नार वो छैल छबीली, लोगों से वो अड़ती है, ऊपर अपने मर्द चढ़ावे, मर्द पर चढ़ती है. One more पहेली I would like to read. मारे से वो जी उठे, बिन मारे मर जाए. मारे से वो जी उठे, बिन मारे मर जाए, बिन पाँव जग जग फिरे, हाथों हाथ बिकाए. And my translation is, when struck it comes to life, if not struck it dies, walks all over without feet, sells from hand to hand. And the answer is tabla. Tabla ऐसे ही होता है, tabla यूं बजता है. So interesting things are there. I try to bring in all kinds of forms and all kinds of, say, designs that one thinks of. अख्तरुल ईमान को सुनाता हूँ एक, आप सुन लें अख्तरुल ईमान को. ये जो है एक चट्टान सी, दरिया में फेंक दें, दरिया के मोती वसते सहरा में फेंक दें, सहरा की सारी रेत को बस्ती पे डाल दें, और अपने दिल से हर काम में फर्दा निकाल दें. सब अपने अपने झंडे नस्ब कर दें उस जगह, अगर हम कभी पलट के यहाँ आए और इस सहरा की जिंदा रेत को बस्ती में खा लिया, सब अपने झंडे हर जगह लहराते पाएंगे, हम उनके नीचे पुरखों की कब्र बनेंगे. And my translation goes, a short one. Let's throw this rock-like thing in the water, in the river, the pearls of river in the vast desert. Let's dump all desert sand on hamlets and wipe all future fears from our hearts. Let's plant our flags here all our flags together. For if we ever returned and saw the hamlets have devoured the raging sand, we may find our flags fluttering there and raise our ancestral storms there. I think I shouldn't take more time because I understand there are people who would like to make observations. आखिरी पढ़ देता हूँ. सिर्फ एक है मुनीर नियाजी की छोटी सी नज्म है. आज का दिन कैसे गुजरा है, कल गुजरेगा कैसे, कल जो परेशानी में बीता वो भूलेगा कैसे, कितने दिन हम और जिएंगे, काम है कितने बाकी, कितने दुख हम काट चुके हैं और है कितने बाकी. खास तरह की सोच थी जिसमें सीधी बात गंवा दी, छोटे छोटे बहनों में ही सारी उम्र गंवा दी. How I spent a beautiful life. How will this day be spent? How will I pass tomorrow? How will the past be forgotten that was spent in sorrow? How many days will I live? How much work is left? How many pains have I suffered? Of how many pains I am bereft? I miss the plain truth. In all such matters, I lost a long life tending petty cares. I think I should stop here. There are other things to read, but I'd like to say make space for the audiences because they might have questions and comments to make. Most welcome.
So you are done?
Yes, I don't want to read because I want to interact and to develop a conversation. If
Okay,
my
so
audiences.
we should move on to question answer session.
Yeah.
All right.
Rafat Saab
okay,
ki bari hai.
Yeah, before that, Rafat has a duty to fulfill. Rafat, show the poster for the next Saturday so that audience can watch.
It's coming.
Coming, and then you take over for the question and answer session. Hello. Next Saturday, one of the person here in the audience is Dr. Ravi Sinha, who will be speaking, along with Dr. Mujibur Rahman of Jamia, and a very famous other personality here in the United States, Sunita Vishwanath. They are going to talk on Karnataka election outcome and the two contesting ideologies that are at play in India. Okay, take out the poster and Rafa, take out the poster and then go ahead, please, with the question and answer session. And before that, I must thank you, Anisur, for a wonderful and very informative session, and with other two speakers, and Rafat is going to do the rest. Right.
Thank you, Razi Bhai. And there are already a lot of questions lined up on the chat box. So I am going to read them. And of course, those who wanted to ask the question, they can raise the digital hand or put your question in the chat box. So the first question is from Salman Quraishi Saab. And he is asking that Madam Prashad has translated the Ghalib, and did you learn anything specific from Madam Prashad's work?
Yes, yes. Friends, Pratchard's work is marvelous, to put it very briefly. She has spent a lifetime doing what she has done. You can't imagine a better website than what she has done. And I have been drawing upon that very frequently. Well, there's just 2 ghazals here of Ghalib which I have put in my book, but I'm doing a full book on the 200 select shades of Ghalib, and I have shown some. I think I have shown 1 to once because I was not very sure about the explanation that I was doing. I have selected 200 shades of Ghalib with annotations, and coming, I hope to finish the project by July end or beginning August, central publishing. In doing that, I have drawn upon and I have really benefited a lot from Pam Pritchard's website. She has in one place given us everything that you can, that you want to look for. Go to libraries, you don't need to. That website is enough for you to just lay your hands. Very many thanks to you, Fran, for developing that, because no one who thinks of Ghalib or even of anyone. Lots of translations are also there which one draws upon, but of course I have done my But my great regards and my great Many thanks to you for putting that up and teaching me that, teaching me the way of engaging with translation and puzzles in particular.
Thank you, Professor. And the next question is from Aisha Rashid. Could you please elaborate difference between share and couplet?
ये बात मैंने कही थी शायद शुरू में, तो आपको ये बात याद रह गई. Couplet share has a certain, उसकी एक अलग mechanism है. Every two lines in a certain metrical order is a couplet, you can say, but share is a different material. In share you have radif, which a couplet doesn't necessarily have. A share has bahr, which a couplet doesn't necessarily have. Couplets are within bahr and outside the bahr also, which I have read some of them. So these are two different kinds of compositions. The only common factor between the two is that a couplet has two lines because the name tells you so, and share also has two lines. But of course, the technology, as you can use the word there, are different. Doha also falls in the same category. Doha is a kind of a different material, different kind of exercise altogether. In Doha, there is a break there that you feel. But in ghazal or in the share, you will see that there is a break, but you don't put commas. Many people, I don't know why they put comma in the ghazals of Ghalib. You write a share and then you put, Ghalib never put any comma there. But in the couplets, you probably do that. So there is a difference between the two. These are two different kinds of arts.
Shukriya, Janab. My apologies that I didn't name the first one. First question was from Salman Qureshi sir.
And why your video?
No, you mentioned.
Why your video is off?
Mine?
Yes.
Yeah.
Turn it on.
Okay.
Yes.
It's on.
You are visible. You are visible now.
ये अगला सवाल है कौसर मजहरी साहब से कि इंग्लिश में जो उर्दू शायरी पढ़ने के बाद क्या आप ये समझते हैं कि कुछ लोग ऐसे होंगे जो उर्दू सीखना पसंद करेंगे या सीखना चाहेंगे?
कौसर साहब बहुत शुक्रिया. बहुत अच्छा सवाल इसलिए है कि ट्रांसलेशन का, तर्जुमे का एक मकसद ये भी होता है कि आप अपने लिए एक ऐसी ऑडियंस भी कायम करें जो आपकी ज़बान तक पहुंचे. तो ये सिर्फ अंग्रेजी में तर्जुमा करने का मतलब ये नहीं कि अंग्रेजी के आप कारी तक पहुंचते हैं, अंग्रेजी रीडर तक पहुंचते हैं, बल्कि आप उर्दू के रीडर तक भी पहुंचते हैं और उसे सीखते हैं. तो ट्रांसलेशन दरअसल दो जबानों के साथ एक तरह का एक हमाहंगी पैदा करना है तर्जुमा निगार के लिए, और वो दो टेक्स्ट क्रिएट करता है अपने जहन में. जैसे मेरा एक मजमून भी इस सिलसिले में है कि एक प्री लाइफ होता है टेक्स्ट का, एक लाइफ और उसकी एक आफ्टर लाइफ होती है. तर्जुमा करते हैं तो आप उसको एक आफ्टर लाइफ भी देते हैं. और अब दो जबानों के साथ जब आपका मामला होता है तो उन दो जबानों में आप अपने को भी वो जबान सिखाते हैं और उस जबान की सबक जो है वो दूसरों तक भी पहुंचाते हैं. तो तर्जुमे के बारे में सिर्फ ये नहीं कहा जाता, और ये कहना भी नहीं चाहिए कि साहब एक जबान से दूसरे में कोई कहानी, नज्म और गजल आपने तर्जुमा कर दिया, बल्कि जबान भी एक दूसरे से सीखने का मौका मिलता है और आप अपने कारी तक जबान के दर्स भी देते हैं और जबान के आयाम और जबान के साथ नोक पलक को भी समझने की कोशिश करते हैं. तो तर्जुमे के और भी बहुत सारे काम है सिवाय इसके. सिर्फ ये नहीं कि वो मैसेज पहुंचाता है, मैसेज किस ढंग से पहुंचाता है और आपको जबान से कैसे करीब लाता है, और हाउ इन टू लैंग्वेजेस यू ट्राई टू कम्युनिकेट, टू कन्वर्स एंड टू डेवलप ए डायलॉग विद द रीडर, with your reader, with the possible reader. I wrote a paper on this. There was a research paper which is included in my book, In Translation, Positions and Paradigms, where I argue this case that translation is dialogue. It's a dialogic process. In translation, you develop a dialogue, you develop a discourse. So आपका सवाल बहुत उम्दा था इस लिहाज से कि उस ज़बान के सीखने का.
Okay, thank you so much. So before I invite Nazir Ahmad Saab to ask the question, I would put on few people on the spot. Francis, Madam Prashet, of course, and Asim Siddiqui Saab, Aljuman Taaf, Samina Khan, Riaz Latif. So please be ready. Thank you so much. And Nazir Saab.
Assalamu alaikum.
जनाब आदाब, अस्सलाम वालेकुम.
An outstanding contribution by Professor Anisur Rahman Sahab. The
बहुत
Urdu
शुक्रिया.
language, and in a broader sense, the Hindustani language, was reflective of the diverse and composite culture of the subcontinent. It was normative as well as formative. While it's true that the cradle of this composite language was the region between Lucknow and Lahore, there was and there still remains a large mass of Urdu-speaking people in the Dakhini dialect in southern and western India. Two questions, sir. In your vast research, did you come across contributions from poets south of the Vindhyachal Mountains, from Maharashtra, Andhra, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, that you consider good enough to include in your selection? And
Yes.
secondly, did your research include the poetry from the highly influential and formative movie industry?
Thank you, Nazir sir.
Yes, two very relevant questions, very interesting ones. As far as the selection is concerned, Nazir sir, thanks for pointing that out. Yes, this anthology, both the anthologies, bring together poets from all regions. Say, for example, you have Quli Qutub Shah, the book begins with that. You have Wali Dakhani, you have Siraj Aurangabadi, and coming down to the modern age, you have poets like Qazi Salim. You have poets who represent the entire India, not only India, but there are so many poets that you come from Karachi, from Lahore, from small places. So it's a larger kind of a combination of spaces, locations, and poets and their languages. But my whole intention was not to go region-wise. The intention was to pick the poet or the poem, which I must have valued and which I thought that it should be passed on to my reader. As far as the movie, that was not my concern at all. It didn't influence me, and that was not the determining particular factor for me. I was going for the literary merit of a text. It could come from anywhere, from any location. बहुत शुक्रिया नजीर साहब.
Madam Parshad, sorry to put you on the spot. Your turn.
Welcome.
Yes. Am I unmuted now?
Yes,
Yes,
you.
yes.
Yes. Well, of course, when Anis was kind enough to present me with a copy of the Ghazal anthology, the first thing I did was look up Ghalib, of course, and I found that there were only 2 Ghazals in the anthology from Ghalib, and this was fine because after all, Ghalib is so well known, and it's very desirable to have full coverage of other poets that, as Anis has pointed out, that are less known and very much advanced the tradition. But I would like to ask him one question about one of the 2 ghazals that he's put in. आह को चाहिए एक उम्र असर होते तक, कौन जीता है तेरी जुल्फ के सर होते तक.
Okay.
And we all know that one, of course, but he has been, obviously, hote tak is the kind of radif you can't capture in English. And so he has invented a new radif, which is wait, oh, wait. And this really is not part of Ghalib's rhetoric in basically most of the verses. And so it tends to push his translations in the direction of transcreations. And I think he would say that that's a price worth paying to have the effect of a good radif that is resonant in English. But I would just like to ask him to comment a bit on that.
Right. Very many thanks for this observation. Yes, it's not exactly what you, I could have done it, hote tak. Most of the people say hone tak, that is different, but hote tak. Anyway, as I said earlier, maybe I have said it just now a while ago, the translation is initially an act of negotiation. And this negotiation takes place in multiple ways. There is not one particular way. It depends on the text that you are engaging with and how do you negotiate with that particular text. So, of course, it doesn't represent the Ghalib exactly in the manner that you were probably expecting, because hote tak was very different to imitate or to bring in the whole scheme of the ghazal. And I was selecting only 2 ghazals. So all the poets, 65 poets that I have selected, only 2 ghazals from each. So that was the pattern. So I thought that let me develop, and it might take you away from the Ghalib's rhythm. But that was the possible way of doing it, of negotiating with Ghalib. I would not say that one has to be very purist all the time. But in translation, sometimes it so happens that you negotiate with the text and try to develop certain things. A.K. Ramanujan wrote about these things. You try to develop a text of your own, and there is a formal translation of the text as it appears. So 2 lines plus 2 lines, 2 lines for 2 lines, and 3 lines for 3 lines. So there is a. So in the ghazal, what I was trying to do, that was trying to represent the same 2-line structure, so that you can have that idea of the form. But the idea that you are trying to, and that I'm taught here, and I stand instructed, that's a very important point that you have made, because it's not possible all the time, let me confess, that you all the time succeed in taking the original in all its spirit and in all its form and in all its all the qualities that it represents. So, well, that's very true, and very, very rightly you have mentioned that Ghalib's hote tak, the expression that he was. So finding an equivalent for me was what I have used. But well, I take your point very positively, and thanks for mentioning to me.
And I congratulate you on such a voluminous work, so well completed and well organized, and obviously very fruitful in terms of sharing awareness of the ghazal genre to a wider audience. So I give you a hearty Mubarakbad.
Thank you.
Thank you.
बहुत शुक्रिया आपका, Francis.
Okay, so before I invite Asim Siddiqui Saab, there is a question from Shrikant Chopra Saab. So his question is, all Indian languages are analyzed and evaluated in reference to Bharat Bhumi Nakshatra 250 BCE. Do you think this approach has any application to Urdu language assessment and criticism, such as Rasa or Alankar? You got it, or?
No, I got it, but it's difficult to answer this question because you need to train yourself in the kind of knowledge that the kind question has come from. Is definitely very well versed with what he's asking, but I am so full as my paucity of knowledge restrains me from giving an answer to this. But Urdu developed the way Urdu developed from Deccan and late 16th century. Of course, I'm not referring to Amir Khusro in the 13th century, mid 13th century, because 14th and 15th is the time in Urdu when Nasr had the say. Nasr developed, especially in the hands of the Sufiya Karam ka jo role tha, wo role bahut bada role tha. But when you come from Amir Khusro and there is a 200 years gap, and when you come to Quli Qutub Shah and then you go to Wali, and now Wali travels from there and comes to Delhi and shows his work to Saadullah Gulshan and says कि साहब ये मैंने गजल लिखी है, क्या ये भी कोई जबान हो सकती है? तो गुलशन ने कहा कि साहब ये तो बहुत अच्छी जबान है, फारसी नहीं है, लेकिन रेख्ता की शुरुआत होती है. तो हर जबान, every language has its own trajectory. And so when it starts from there, from south, and changes hands and goes to Siraj and comes to Mir and then comes to Delhi and comes to Ghalib and comes to Dagan, then the whole scenario is open. So there are intersections in the development of language. This language came into being per se, the name, so far to say, the name. It was only towards the end of the 18th century that we came across the word called Urdu. But before that, it was Ikhti, Hindi, Hindavi, and so many other names were there. But I'm not in a position to relate to your question, the spirit of your question, but I was only trying to say how Urdu has a very long journey to travel, to pass through and to come to arrive at a point where Urdu has now become a lingua franca of most of the Indians who speak, and most of us even don't know that they're speaking Urdu, even though they are speaking Urdu in a big way. The whole idea of this whole book was to bring this to the audience to be able to understand what Hazar-o-Khwahishe could mean and what Hazar Rang Shairi could mean. So they are in a position now to understand. That is how the language develops and goes from place to place, changing hands. I'm not very sure if I have been able to give an answer because I don't have that fund of knowledge from where you spoke, but very little bit that I could capture and I could try to make my point. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Rahman. Asim Siddiqui Saab, and next would be Anjum Maltaf. Asim Saab, unmute please.
No, I don't have any question. I can just congratulate Anisa for writing an excellent book. And another thing that I can just mention is that apart from his translation, there is an extremely well-written introduction. And he has actually said so much in that brief introduction in both his books. the kind of classification that he has offered, definitions that he has offered, everything is written in a very precise manner, very crisp manner. And I think that is also one of the highlights of both his books. So I can congratulate him. And I can also say with pride that I have read almost all his works. I mean, almost all his poetry, these two books, and of course many other books also. And this is one of his
आसिम
best.
साहब, you are very kind and आपने वो बात कही जो मैं कह नहीं पा रहा था कभी. मैं कैसे कहूँ कि मेरा इंट्रोडक्शन बहुत अच्छा है. I really worked very hard on that introduction of both of the first book and the second book, but the second book more especially because I didn't leave anything that I could lay my hands upon as far as the development of the form and the kinds and the metrical designs and the patterns. I shouldn't be saying that, but probably anyone who wants to understand what nazm means in Urdu and what it is actually. The very first paragraph in that says कि नज़्म के मानी क्या है. बहुत शुक्रिया आपका, बहुत शुक्रिया.
अनीस साहब आपने मुझसे what is going on here? What is going on here?
Yeah, it's a double talk.
Anyway, there is some device.
एक definition शायरी की ये होती है कि poetry is not heard but it is overheard.
Yes. Very well said. Timely.
Let me
Someone
make
has two
devices.
devices.
Somebody has turned on device next to that. There are two devices. That is creating this problem.
Okay, so let's see if it is resolved. Anjum Altaf sahab.
जी अनीस साहब, आपने जो नमूने पढ़े वो बहुत ही अच्छे लगे और मैं ये किताब जितनी जल्द हो सकेगी जरूर पढ़ना चाहूँगा. मेरा डायलेमा है जो मैं आपसे पूछना चाहता हूँ कि आप इसके मुतालिक किस तरह सोचते हैं कि जब हम खास तौर पे उर्दू से तर्जुमा करते हैं तो तर्जुमा उन लोगों के लिए किया जाता है जिनको उर्दू नहीं आती, मगर मैं ये देखता हूँ कि उर्दू से तर्जुमे ज्यादातर वही लोग पढ़ते हैं जिनको उर्दू आती है और वो बहुत कम पढ़ते हैं जिन्हें उर्दू नहीं आती. तो इसके मुतालिक मैं सोचता रहता हूँ, आपका इसके मुतालिक क्या ख्याल है?
बहुत ही अच्छा सा पॉइंट है ये जो आपने रेज किया. जरूरी नहीं कि हर वो तर्जुमा
आपके यहाँ
Anis साहब, excuse me, there is another device with
उसको टर्न ऑफ कर दीजिए.
मेरे यहाँ नहीं है.
क्या है जो कहीं इको कर रही है कंटिन्यूअसली.
दो डिवाइस पास में.
And suddenly it started. I mean, within few minutes.
Let me mute Anjum Saab and see if it's coming from there.
It is now okay, but it somebody turns it on. I think पहले भी हुआ है.
हुआ था.
Sorry, yeah.
Okay.
तो अल्ताफ साहब आपने जो सवाल उठाया वो है अहम सवाल है, लेकिन हम तर्जुमा इसलिए भी पढ़ते हैं कि देखें कि हमारे को ट्रांसलेटर ने किस तरह से उस लैंग्वेज से और उस फॉर्म से को जस्टिफाई करने की और उसने नेगोशिएट किस तरह किया है. ट्रांसलेशन दरअसल सिर्फ इसलिए नहीं हम करते और पढ़ते हैं कि हम एक टेक्स्ट दूसरे तक पहुंचाते हैं, बल्कि हम सीखते भी हैं उसी सिलसिले से. जैसे हमने किसी नज़्म का अगर किया तो आई ऑल्सो ट्राई टू लर्न my own English and my own Urdu, and by proxy it so happens that my reader also learns his language, that is Urdu, and his English. So translation works in multiple ways, and my take is that while translating this I was also trying to learn my own Urdu and Persian, and also the discipline in which I grew, that is English, which I taught for 4 decades or so. So translation for me is a language learning exercise as well. So many people who have known that language come back to this to understand how this particular language and this particular work of art मे बी ट्रांसफर पॉसिबली ट्रांसलेशन में आप हमेशा कहते हैं पॉसिबली हो सकता है या नहीं हो सकता है। तो ये एक बहुत ही दिलचस्प फेनोमेनन है कि ट्रांसलेशन पढ़ने का मकसद क्या है। रीइंकारनेशन है टेक्स्ट का, और उस टेक्स्ट के पढ़ने वाले के अलग अलग इंटेंशंस है। एक तो मैसेज के लिए हम पढ़ते हैं, लेकिन मैसेज के अलावा भी कोई चीज़ है जिसके लिए हम पढ़ते हैं। स्टाइल के लिए पढ़ते हैं, जबान के लिए पढ़ते हैं, अपने को एजुकेट करने के लिए पढ़ते हैं, और उस जबान में ही पढ़ते हैं जिसको हमें मालूम है, लेकिन उसको पढ़ते हैं। तो मल्टीपल वेज ऑफ रीडिंग द टेक्स्ट एंड मल्टीपल मेथड्स आर देयर। I don't know if I've been able to capture the question and being able to.
मैं एक बात और पूछ लूं। ये जो आप बात कह रहे हैं ये मेरी समझ में आती है कि जो सेल्फ एजुकेशन का उसका एक मकसद है वो बहुत अहम है, मगर जो हमारे दिल में एक बहुत ख्वाहिश है कि हमारी इतनी अच्छी शायरी है वो उन लोगों तक पहुंचे जिनको हमारी जबान नहीं आती, उसमें मुझे लगता है हम कामयाब नहीं हो रहे। इसकी क्या वजह है ये मैं नहीं जानता, मगर जितनी भी हम तर्जुमा कर रहे हैं बहुत कम।
मेरा ख्याल ये है कि मेरा ख्याल ये है कि ये हम जो करते हैं, आप जो करते हैं, आपने भी 2 तर्जुमे आपके हैं, आपने फैज का किया और उसके अलावा आपने गालिब का भी किया है। तो मेरा ख्याल ये है कि तर्जुमे पहुंचते हैं। कोई वजह ऐसी है कि किताब आखिर क्यों बिक रही है? ये हजारों ख्वाहिशें, मुझे तो बहुत हैरत है कि ये नज़मों वाली किताब गज़ल वाली किताब से ज़्यादा बिक, तो इसलिए नहीं बिक रही होगी कि पॉपुलर तो ज़्यादा गज़ल है, लेकिन मैं समझता हूँ कि रीडर है, ट्रांसलेशन का रीडर बहुत बड़ा है। स्पेशली पिछले 3 दहाइयों में ट्रांसलेशन का रीडर बहुत बड़ा है। ट्रांसलेशन फुल इंडस्ट्री है। पब्लिशर के यहाँ पहले ट्रांसलेशन के लिए कोई जगह नहीं हुआ करती थी, और ये हालत थी कि ट्रांसलेटर का नाम नहीं लिखा जाता था। पहले ऑथर का नाम होता था, ट्रांसलेटर का नाम नहीं होता। फिर वो एक जमाना आया कि ट्रांसलेटर का नाम लास्ट पेज पे छोटे पॉइंट में लिखा जाता था। अब ये है कि ट्रांसलेटर का नाम फर्स्ट पेज पे होता है। सो ट्रांसलेशन इज ए को ऑथर इन ए वे. So the whole personality of the translator is a very important personality now. And my take is, maybe I'm differing with you, but my take is that people are reading translation in a big way these days, in a very big way these days. And they're trying to read their text as also in translation to be able to compare and see how this work really matters and how this work really improves or doesn't. And that is how comparative literature is all about it, because comparative and translation go hand in hand together. And these are the 2 very important disciplines which of late have gained currency in the university system to which I belong.
So it could be that Anjum Altaf Saab's observation is from Pakistani readers side.
नहीं, लेकिन अगर ऐसा है, नहीं वहां भी पढ़ा जाता होगा। उसकी वजह ये है कि माय फर्स्ट बुक, द गजल बुक, उसको लिबर्टी प्रेस ने वहां छापा एंड अरेंजमेंट विद हार्पर कॉलिंस इंडिया। तो ये 1 साल हुई उस किताब को, कराची से लिबर्टी बुक्स ने उसको छापा है और वहां भी मकबूल हुई है, तभी तो उस किताब को छापा हुआ। तो अंदाजा ये होता है, मेरा अंदाजा है कि किताब बिकती है और लोग खरीदते हैं।
अनीस साहब, मैं ये कह रहा था कि इसमें कोई शुबा नहीं है कि ये किताबें लोग पढ़ रहे हैं, मगर मैं ये कह रहा था कि ये वो लोग पढ़ रहे हैं जो पहले से वो जबान जानते हैं। The proportion of the type of readers.
साहब, आप जो है 2 लोगों के कमेंट हैं, सलमान कुरैशी साहब के और रिजवान अहमद साहब के, जो चैट बॉक्स में इसी सिलसिले में उन्होंने जो है कुछ कमेंट किए, तो उससे थोड़ा सा आपको और क्लैरिफिकेशन होगा। वो बात सही है कि जो, लेकिन उनका कहना है सलमान साहब को कि जिनको बहुत ज्यादा अच्छी उर्दू नहीं आती उनको कम से कम ये हेल्प करता है। ऐसे ही एक कमेंट जो है रिजवान साहब का है, तो वो जरा आप देखिए, अनलेस के अनीस साहब कुछ ऐड करना चाहते हैं आपके।
नहीं।
अच्छा, तो अगला सवाल जो है फैजान मुकीम साहब है। सिंस यू हैव इनकॉर्पोरेटेड सौदाज रिडल्स, I was wondering about proverbs and folk songs in Urdu. Are these some of this kind in your book, sir? And question 2, could folk songs also be considered as part of the Urdu poetry?
Yes, of course. Yes, of course. मैंने जो मिसालें हैं फैजान साहब, in the introduction, if you have, I think you have the book, you will see all possible kinds of Urdu nazm that I have tried to index there. Now, when you are choosing from 500 years of Urdu poetry, 65 or 70 poets, how many genres can you accommodate? And that is why I thought that, let me take Mustazad, for example. Mustazad is a very important form. तो मुस्तज़ाद मैंने ले लिया, रिडल्स का आपने जिक्र किया वो मैंने लिया, इस तरह की और भी नज़में हमने ली हैं जो बहुत फोक जिसका नेचर है. फॉर एग्जांपल नज़ीर अकबर आबादी इज देयर. You will see that a very different culture, that poetry of Iranese, for example, is there. Iranese की मर्सी है उसके अंदर आपको मिलेंगे. कसीदा, for example, उसमें you will find कसीदा by Sauda. हजरत अली के शान में एक कसीदा है जो बहुत अहम कसीदा है. So my intention was to bring together all possible forms of Urdu poetry, which are major forms of Urdu. लोकगीत हैं, एकल उत्साही के बड़े अच्छे गीत हैं इस जमाने के लिखे हुए, पुराने गीत भी हिंदी में बहुत ज्यादा उसका. लेकिन मेरा ख्याल है they call for another anthology, but in an anthology of the kind that I had in mind, I was trying to execute. I tried to collect as many varieties that you could probably think of. But thank you very much, Faizan Saab, for this question, which is a very haunting question. I will keep this in mind to think of further.
Rafat,
Thank you, Professor Rahman.
Rafat,
Yeah.
Professor रिजवान साहब जो हैं, जो वन ऑफ द स्पीकर में से, वो
Yes, I'm
जाने
reading
वाले
it.
हैं. Within 1 minute he will be leaving.
Okay, so
तो
I'm going
पढ़ दे
to
उनका.
read his question, Rizwan Ahmad Saab's question. Is that okay?
Yeah.
जी sir.
Okay. Urdu has its own imagery and metaphors. In your translation, you have left some metaphors such as Shaddad, Namrud, unexplained. Do you think you are doing it to challenge the readers to explore it more?
शद्दाद और नमरूद पता नहीं किसी नज़्म में आया होगा, but you will see that I have not, annotations are not there in translation. I have not annotated them anywhere in both the books. There is no annotation as such. I want the readers to train himself to know, to explore further on his own, her own. I'm reminded of Robert Crosh, a Canadian poet, because everyone was asking, bhai ye Canadian poetry kya hoti hai? Who is this Canadian literature that is writing? So Robert Crosh once said, I have told you my name, gentlemen, so many times, I'm not going to tell my name once again. So you have to find out who I am. So I have not explained, my annotations are not there. I have not annotated any. नमरूद शद्दाद हो सकता है कहीं पे आया होगा. तो कुछ काम मेरा ख्याल ये है कि रीडर को भी करना होता है. Reader will also have to join hands and to come forward. But of course, I take note of this point because some explanations are inbuilt. Some explanations are ill-built. एक होता था कि साहब वो लिखा हमने ट्रांसलेशन में, I have seen it like this के सावन और लिखा the rainy season, ब्रैकेट में नहीं बल्कि कॉमा दे, the month of rains, sawan in the month of rain. So inbuilt translations are there. I don't really recall which particular poem you have in mind. I'm sorry, I can't recall that, but maybe the context can tell you that. Like for example, इसमें एक नज़्म है जो रामायण का आखिरी सीन, एक सीन है और बहुत ही पावरफुल, बहुत ही जबरदस्त नज़्म है मेरी नज़र में वो है, that is by चकबस्त. And Chakbast's poem is a short poem. The last scene, the scene is that राम वनवास को जा रहे हैं और माँ के पास पहुंचते हैं कि मुझे आज्ञा दो मैं जाऊं. अब उसमें annotations की जरूरत नहीं थी. मुझे लगा ये कि पता है कि ये कौन सा situation है. And every Indian knows that kind of a situation. So there are several other, might be. For example, आप देखें कि जो ईरानीज़ मसनवी भी चाहे, जंगल से आई फातिमा ज़हरा, उम्मत ने मुझको लूट दिया बाबा. Now, if I go into explaining this whole Marcia would not be translated, but we'll go into the annotations. But it is expected of the reader that the reader would know, उम्मत ने मुझको लूट लिया, वाह मोहम्मद जंगल से आई फातिमा, और उसके बाद जो साहब moving. So there are many such annotations where allusions are there, which need to be explained. So some pain has to be taken by the reader also, and that is what the translator demands also. Because a text demands, text तो demand कर, अभी wasteland जैसा मुश्किल poem जब लिखा बेचारे एलियट ने, तो उसको कोई पढ़ ही नहीं रहा था, रिजेक्ट कर दिया 3 महीने के अंदर. Then he had to write the notes to the poem so that people could understand, and then came the great applause for that poem. Earlier it was said it's a crossword puzzle. एक साहब ने लिख दिया एक reviewer ने, and the other reviewer says that it is a spurious exercise in verbal algebra. No one can understand what this poem is all about. So the reader had to take pains to be able to understand. So similarly, there is some part that the reader has to play. But your point is very well taken, Rizwan Saab. आइंदा के लिए ख्याल रखेंगे इसका.
वो it's from Admi Nama.
Admi Nama.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And before we proceed further, I would like to thank Rizwan Ahmad Saab, if he is still there, because he has to leave in within few minutes.
हाँ,
So thank
class हो गई
you so
उनकी।
much, Rizwan Saab, and we really appreciate participating in this discussion.
मेरी जानिब से भी आपको रिजवान साहब बहुत शुक्रिया, आप आए तशरीफ लाए और आपने।
Okay, so next
Thank you very
question is
much. I really
from.
enjoyed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Rizwan Saab. Next question is interesting from Aisha Rashid. So, Anisa,
जी,
do you
फरमाएं।
have any translational kasak, if she may say so? When you translate Urdu poetry and feel that the audience can't have the same level of sense that you have while reading it in your mother tongue. Very good question. There should always be a kasak. Baki reh gayi.
Kasak, one say important longing is, or kind of a, I don't know what is the right word for kasak. ये भी एक translation का मसला है. So once you have finished your work, the amount of kasak is very huge, and you keep on reading and reading and reading countless times. And it is after a very long time that you think that this far, no, as I said a while ago. Because it's the process of revision is very long. And this is my advice to the young translators, my students, whom I say that do your work, leave it for a while, 10 days, 15 days, a month, 2 months. And that is why my books took so long to come into print. So ek kasak to wo hai. And that is from time to time, you keep on revising your translation. And ultimately, you see that the first draft is very, very different from the final draft that you. But in spite of that, having said that, you see that even after you have published, you discover that probably this word was not the right word. Probably this line could have been said like that. And then you come to appreciate your own work and not appreciate it. So that far as that longing to develop your text further always is there. That is not only for translation, that is also for the creative writing as well. You are aware, as a student of literature, we are aware, you are aware, and all of us are aware that the second and the third editions of the novels and the poems that have come to us are revised editions in which there are changes, many changes have taken place. And there are several examples of that. So that creative longing and that creative hiatus always remains. You said, yes, of course that is there. You enjoy also at the same time. So it's very interesting process how you develop a text and how you engage with yourself in developing.
Thank you so much. रियाज साहब माफ कीजिए जो है आपको, लेकिन इससे पहले के लोगों ने सवाल किए हुए थे उनको मैं एंटरटेन कर रहा था. आप रियाज लतीफ साहब.
Hello everyone. I don't know ज़्यादा तो मैं क्या कहूँगा, because I think a lot of ground has been covered already. और बहुत सारी जो बातें थी वो शायद मैं अनीस साहब से तो कम से कम बहुत पहले कर ही चुका हूँ in our रेख्ता session that we did. So I think I have nothing very specific or very insightful to say, as so many others have kind of made observations or pointed out things and raised questions and so on and so forth. So I think mostly usi cheez mein. So once again, I'll very briefly wrap it up by just congratulating you once again for this marvelous works, both of them, and hopefully many more to come from you. So that's all I'm going to just say that.
It's so great to hear from a fellow translator, and we learn from each other. And what I would say that some of the translations by you that I have read, and I have admired that, especially because some of the translations which I couldn't lay my hands upon. I mentioned during my talk a while ago that Fatma Shera was very difficult for me to translate.
Shafiq Fatma Shera.
Was very difficult to, and I left her out because I couldn't manage that. Another very difficult poet for me to translate was Sara Shagufta, but I have included her because two of the poems that I could somehow negotiate.
I tried and I laid my hands on both of them.
No, you did.
And just to elaborate a little, आपने बात छेड़ी तो कि यही कि ये प्रोसेस के बारे में कि उसमें बहुत सारी चीजें आपने कई लोगों ने जो बात की वही है कि the idea is to kind of know, at least I mean I can speak for myself personally, कि you have to perseverance, के stay with the poet, वो एक बड़ा pedestrian सा जो metaphor है वही है कि वो अचार पकने के लिए डालते हैं ना, patience, and then at some point, ये एक हमारे गुजराती एक editor थे poet, and he used to say कि वो नज्म भेजी आपको छापने के लिए, तो बोले कि हाँ वो पकने के लिए डाली है उसको, wait for 3 months, whatever. So maybe there is, I mean, it sounds a little flippant, but there's something to it. You make it your own in the original, and then kind of really attempt it and whatnot. And
you're very right. You are very right. I agree with that. You revisit your work many a times.
And then again, as you said, that becomes your first draft, and then again wait and see how it kind of really kind of makes sense into the target language.
Exactly.
Does it become English? And does it flow seamlessly as far as possible?
Exactly.
Sometimes you're successful, sometimes you're not. But so I think that's it. So
I will also add to that. I will also add to that. When you are doing an anthology of this kind, where many poets are put together, you have to do and undo yourself many a time. Your own self you have to undo.
Absolutely.
Because you don the garb of a particular poet for a day, and it's not for a day. You remain with that poet. Stay. You use the word stay, which is very right word. You stay with that poet some time, and then undo yourself. So doing and doing is something. If you are translating just one poet, then you remain with that poet and you know what this poet is and how you are going to negotiate and talk to them, converse with them. Because I said the translation is essentially a dialogue that you develop at multiple levels. So first dialogue is with the culture, then with the language, with the kind of idiom that he's trying to develop, the sensibility, the literary tradition. So I have a whole lot of,
absolutely.
Discourse that I did.
And I think I would even extend this to even your own creative writing. Whatever little that I do. I mean, I have to stay with myself in that sense. और फिर जो नज्म गजल जो कुछ भी है बाद में फिर आगे की बात है.
Actually, you can say so with greater qualification you have. As an architect, you also know how. Because I did once write a paper on translation, and I'll send that article to you, or that is there in my book also, where I talk about architecture and translation. And there are so many parallels that I have talked about. I have compared the two techniques.
This has been an old standing theme. I mean, I gave up on architecture long back. I mean, now I'm a professional art historian.
So, thank you
अवतार खैर, लेकिन ये तो बात कहीं और निकल जाएगी. आपके लिए है ये प्रोग्राम, मेरा नहीं है. So I think we should just stick to your achievements here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, and congratulations once again, and thank you all for this wonderful session. So it was great listening to everyone.
Thank you so much, Riyasa. तो इसी सिलसिले में मेरा एक सवाल है और सब ट्रांसलेटर से है कि जाहिर है कि ट्रांसलेटर अपनी पूरी मेहनत करता है, उसके बाद जैसे आपने कहा उसको पकने के लिए भी छोड़ देता है कुछ महीने, और उसके बाद उसमें तरमीम करता है, लेकिन आखिर में आप ट्रांसलेटर्स, क्या ये कभी जहन में आता है अरे यार इससे भी अच्छा हो सकता था?
आता है. ये बात मैंने अभी कही थी. Because you keep on revising your work even before publication. But even if you have published, then you realize sometimes, as I said a while ago, that even then you realize that probably this line or this phrase could have been done better or in this manner. And it's an unending exercise. Translation sometimes also is a creative process. You recreate a text. And एक मेरी understanding है कि अगर आपकी poetic sensibility खुद है तो आप तर्जुमा कर सकते हैं शायरी का बेहतर तरीका. तो किसी ने कहा कि शेर सुनाने का वक्त दोपहर का नहीं होता, भाई शाम को शेर सुनाया करते हैं. दोपहर में क्या शेर उस वक्त आराम करते हैं, कबूला वगैरह करते हैं. तो उसी तरह से you keep on doing that. It's very interesting. ये सवाल आपका अच्छा है, अहम है.
बहुत शुक्रिया. मुअज्जम साहब कुछ फाइनल कमेंट करेंगे या मैं रसी भाई को दे दूं?
तो मैं कुछ कहना चाहता था,
इसीलिए मुझे मालूम था.
जब हुआ तो वो भूल गया. तो मैं ये कहने वाला था कि उर्दू शायरी का जो विरसा है वो सेमेटिक भी है और आर्यन भी है. तो गजल जो है, कसीदा और गजल, ये सेमेटिक विरसा है और मसनवी खासतौर से जो है ये आर्यन विरसा है, जिसको संस्कृत में महाकाव्य कहते हैं। तो ये कसीदा, मसनवी, गजल, तो ये तमाम चीजें जो मेन जानर्स हैं उर्दू की, तो ये जो इसका दोहरा विरसा है, ये गालिबन एक और डिस्टिंग्विशिंग मार्क है उर्दू शायरी का। और ये एक हद तक कुछ और जबानें शेयर करती हैं, जैसे पंजाबी है, और पंजाबी शायरी में भी आपको ये दोनों चीजें मिलेंगी। और तो बस और तो कुछ नहीं मालूम।
Muslim Sahab, I'm extremely grateful to you for adding this point, because this is something very precious that you have given to me. I will carry it on further, because the Semitic and the Aryan heritage that you have talked of, I didn't think of that. And especially when I was doing my introduction, maybe I could have included that, but I probably missed that, but I am enriched, and thank you very much for adding to that and to my knowledge, and also that at the proper time I would like to.
मौजम साहब, एक क्विक कमेंट, ये बताइए कि उर्दू से हिंदी में ट्रांसलेशन होते हैं या खाली रोमन हिंदी में लिखा जाता है? कोई ऐसे केस हैं जहां पर उर्दू को हिंदी में ट्रांसलेट किया हो? रोमन उर्दू में तो खैर पढ़ के, रोमन हिंदी में तो पढ़ के सबके समझ में आ जाता है।
क्योंकि जैसे सबसे बड़ा जो सोर्स है इसका रेख्ता में जो है वो सिर्फ वो स्क्रिप्ट में कन्वर्ट करते हैं।
जी जी।
मेरे ख्याल में एक दो साइट्स ऐसी हैं जो उर्दू गजल को हिंदी में ट्रांसलेट करते हैं। तो मेरे ख्याल में अनीसुर रहमान साहब ज्यादा बेहतर जानते हैं मुझसे।
लिप्यांतरण, रफत साहब, लिप्यांतरण हुआ है बहुत, और बगैर तर्जुमे, बगैर चीजों को बहुत बदले हुए, जैसे बहुत क्लिष्ट हिंदी संस्कृताइज्ड अगर है तो लोग
हाँ, वही मेरा मतलब है।
हाँ, वो कर देते हैं, लेकिन आमतौर पे कोशिश ये रहती है कि बहुत ज्यादा तब्दीली ना की जाए, बिकॉज अगर करेंगे तो फिर बहुत ज्यादा वो पर्शियनाइज्ड हो जाएगा या बहुत संस्कृताइज्ड हो जाएगा। हो सकता है कि जो मजरू हो जाए, जो उसकी रूह है वो मजरू हो जाए। तो जो मैंने देखा है उसमें लिप्यांतरण करते हैं, आमतौर पर लिपि बदल देते हैं और कोई बहुत खालिस, बहुत मुश्किल लफ्ज है उसका तर्जुमा कर देते हैं ताकि फ्लो बरकरार।
बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया अनीस साहब आपका, और रिजवान साहब तो खैर चले गए, मौजम साहब का, और हमारे आज जो इंट्रोडक्शन में डॉक्टर रजीउद्दीन साहब का बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया। It was a wonderful session and there was a lot of interest and people asked many questions, and my apologies to those who I put on this spot.
You forgot to bring your favorite person.
Oh, Ravi Saab. Ravi Saab,
he can ask from the Hindi perspective.
Razi bhai, आपने पहले क्यों नहीं याद दिलाया? Ravi Sinha साहब, come on.
नहीं, आप रन करते हैं हिंदी के सेशंस भी।
हाँ, आप तो लिख रहे हैं। उसी जहन से ये सवाल पूछा था, क्योंकि रवि साहब जो मुश्किल उर्दू के लफ्ज हैं उनका हिंदी में ट्रांसलेट करते हैं और उसका इंग्लिश में भी करते हैं गजल के नीचे। तो ये मैंने ये सवाल वहीं से पूछा था और मेरे
लेकिन थैंक यू रफत साहब। मेरा सवाल एक्चुअली एक है, तो आज अनीसुर रहमान साहब पकड़ में आए हैं तो मैंने सोचा मैं पूछ ही लूं कि जो ये हिंदी में भी क्वेश्चन इज लिटिल बिट सोशियोलॉजिकल या हिस्टोरिकल। ये जो अनफॉर्चुनेट डिवीजन हुआ उर्दू और हिंदी में, स्पेशली हिंदी लिटरेचर और हिंदी पोइट्री जो अलग से चली, तो खड़ी बोली जिसका जो आपने जैसा उर्दू में कहा है 500 साल का है, उससे भी ज्यादा की हिस्ट्री है, और वही खड़ी बोली उसी इलाके में पैदा हो रही थी। लेकिन हिंदी में आने में, हिंदी लिटरेचर में आने में खड़ी बोली को बहुत वक्त लगा। 19वीं सदी के लेटर हाफ में खड़ी बोली आई, और जब मॉडर्न हिंदी आई, खड़ी बोली हिंदी में आई, तो जो शुरुआती पोएट्री हुई वो काफी प्रिमिटिव सी दिखती है, जबकि उर्दू में ऑलरेडी यू हैव स्टॉलवर्ट्स एंड ग्रेट्स लाइक मीर एंड गालिब, जो इतने मॉडर्न हैं, इतने आगे निकले हुए हैं। मीर, हमेशा मैं ये कोट करता हूँ कि मीर जब कहते हैं कि मत सहल हमें जानो, फिरता है फलक बरसों, तब खाक के पर्दे से इंसान निकलते हैं, ऐसी चीज वो 18th सेंचुरी में कह रहे हैं। और गालिब का वो कि काबा मेरे पीछे है, कलीसा मेरे आगे, और हिंदी में इतना प्रिमिटिव है कि भारतेंदु हरिश्चंद्र जब शुरू करते हैं ब्रजभाषा वगैरह से खड़ी बोली में लोग आते हैं तो बहुत शुरुआती है। इवन 20वीं सदी के शुरू में जब छायावाद आता है तो भी प्रिमिटिव लगता है, शुरुआती लगता है। फिराक साहब काफी अपना फ्रस्ट्रेशन और डिसअपॉइंटमेंट जाहिर करते थे हिंदी पोएट्स के बारे में उसी इलाहाबाद में जहां निराला थे और महादेवी वर्मा थी और सुमित्रा नंदन पंत थे कि हिंदी इतनी पीछे क्यों रह गई। तो ये खड़ी बोली के हिंदी में लिटरेचर में आने में इतना वक्त क्यों लगा। दूसरा उसी से रिलेटेड सवाल ये है कि उर्दू जो 400 साल आगे थी हिंदी वाली खड़ी बोली से, वो उर्दू का लिटरेचर अब आज आप कैसे इवेलुएट करते हैं, कहाँ पहुंचा है। 1913 में एक चीज के ट्रांसलेशन पर रविन्द्रनाथ टैगोर को नोबेल प्राइज मिल गया और उर्दू का ये 500 साल का इतिहास, आपको कुछ डिसअपॉइंटमेंट है कि उर्दू गालिब के होने के बाद 100 साल बाद उर्दू को जो करना चाहिए था वो उर्दू कर नहीं पाई।
रवि साहब बहुत अहम सवाल पूछे हैं आप। जहाँ तक हिंदी के पूरी ट्रेजेक्ट्री का, लिंग्विस्टिक ट्रेजेक्ट्री का सवाल है, probably I'm not the qualified person to comment on that. I don't really know about how this language, जो खड़ी बोली का जिक्र आप कर रहे हैं उसके बारे में क्वालिफाइड नहीं। लेकिन जहाँ तक उर्दू का सवाल है, उर्दू फ्रॉम 16th सेंचुरी स्पेशली अगर आप देखिएगा तो जबान की नोक पलक बहुत संवारी गई है हर जमाने। और 3-4 बहुत अहम मिसालें हैं। एक तो कुली कुतुब शाह जिसका जिक्र किया, उसके बाद जो दूसरा स्टॉलवर्ट और माइलस्टोन है वो है वली, और उसके बाद सिराज बहुत बड़े माइलस्टोन है, फिर है मीर, और उसके बाद आप आते हैं गालिब, और गालिब के बाद दाग तक। तो अब देखिएगा कि जबान जो है ना ऐसी रिफाइन होती चली गई है। लेकिन अगर आज की जबान को आप देखें, जिस तरह नज़में आज लिखी जा रही हैं, तो बिल्कुल हमारी रोज जबान है जिसमें कोई किसी तरह का सिंगार नहीं, कोई बनावट नहीं, कोई नक्शा नाक दुरुस्त नहीं किया जा रहा है। वक्त नहीं था इसलिए मैं कुछ सुना नहीं पाया आपको। कुछ नज़में ऐसी थी इसके जैसे लग रहा है कि देयर इज अ कन्वर्सेशन, स्पेशली द प्रोज पोएम दैट हैज come to stay in Urdu in a big way today, and it has created marvels. So your question is basically sociological as also philosophical, because I understand that a language, the development of a language is a very complex process, how it goes from one stage to another, but location also matters a lot. जैसे echoes आती हैं, echoes होती हैं जबान के अंदर, उस जबान की जो आपकी मादरी जबान है, और वो आपकी अंग्रेजी में भी उसका असर आता है और आपकी उर्दू में भी उसका असर आता है और हिंदी में भी उसका असर आता है, मादरी जबान। तो लिंग्विस्टिक इंटरचेंज का जिक्र जो है जो मैं भी कर रहा था जब रिजवान साहब ने सवाल पूछा कि टाइटल, बिकॉज दिस इज करेंटली वेरी पॉपुलर व्हेन लिंग्विस्टिक when two languages are shaking hands. So in the development of a language it often happens कि आदान प्रदान उसमें बहुत होता है। उर्दू के ग्रोथ की एक वजह शायद ये भी है कि इसमें आदान प्रदान हुआ। हिंदी के बहुत सारे अल्फाज इस्तेमाल होते हैं।
May I ask in between this one? I mean, it's curious. I get a little curious into that. ये फिराक साहब का जो जमाना था, उसी जमाने महादेवी वर्मा और निराला जैसे जायंट्स थे, और इवन सुमित्रानंद पंत का भी जमाना था शायद, और कौन था चौथा कौन जायंट था हिंदी का उसी जमाने में, और उसी इलाहाबाद में थे। So what was so much missing in their very thoughtful poetry in Hindi that Firaq Sahab really had consistently commented on their poetry, that there is nothing in the Hindi poetry that
आप जो कह रहे हैं रजी साहब, वो देखिए फिराक साहब ने तो बहुत सारी तकरीरों में अपने कहा है और बहुत लोग जानते हैं और लतीफे के तौर पे भी उसको नरेट करते हैं, वो सब भी कहते हैं। फिराक साहब को यहाँ बहुत बड़ा शायर वो आदमी इसलिए है, खास तौर पे आप देखिए जिस तरह से भारतीय नारी का चित्रण फिराक ने किया, किसी ने नहीं किया उस तरह से, स्पेशली अपनी रुबाइयाँ, रूप की रुबाइयाँ जो हैं। तो हिंदी का जो इन्फ्लुएंस, संस्कृत का जो इन्फ्लुएंस उन्होंने कबूल किया, उसको कैसे रिफाइन किया उर्दू में ढाल के। और हिंदी का कोई शायर ऐसा नहीं था उनकी नज़र में जो इस तरह से रिफाइन करता हुआ हिंदी को ले जाए और करीब दूसरे जबानों के लाए कि वो आपके यहाँ ऑडिटरी अपील एक बड़ी जबरदस्त चीज होती
तो
है।
वो उसी क्या रंग में देखना चाहते थे, उर्दू के रंग में, क्यों वो हिंदी देखना चाहते थे?
वो असल में सौतियात का मसला था, मेरा ख्याल ये है कि सौतियात, वो ऑडिटरी बहुत ज्यादा उनके यहाँ था इंटरफेरेंस। एक लफ्ज है इंग्लिश में क्रिटिसिज्म में इस्तेमाल हुआ थे, ऑडिटरी इमेजिनेशन, और वो कहते हैं फ्रॉम टाइम टू टाइम आई हियर टाइम स्विंगेड चैरियट हरिंग नियर, ऐसा लगता है कि साहब वो रथ चला रहा है और हमारे पीछे पीछे चल रहा है। फिर
लेकिन
आपके यहाँ ऑडिटरी इमेजिनेशन बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है,
शुभ
और उनका
नहीं है।
कहना ये, तो
जी।
वो कहते थे कि शायद हिंदी के ऑडिटरी इमेजिनेशन जो है ना वो करख्त है, वो इतना संस्कृताइज्ड है कि उसके अंदर वो इमोशनल वैक्यूम है उसके अंदर। दैट इज प्रोबब्ली दिस व्हाई हाउ आई अंडरस्टैंड, बिकॉज क्या बताऊं कि जैसे खयाम की रुबाइयों के बारे में उन्होंने एक मतलब कहा कि भाई निजी गुफ्तगू में उन्होंने कहा, आई डोंट नो इफ आई शुड, बट उन्होंने कहा कि भाई वो बच्चन ने तो कर ही दिया है, अब काहे के लिए कोई और कुछ करेगा, बच्चन ने तो कर ही दिया है तो अब बदशाला तो लिख दिया उन्होंने, तो अब क्या जरूरत है कुछ
बट निराला
बट
की
इट इज
तो ऐसा करें,
हाँ
निराला पोएट दुष्यंत, डिड ही से एनीथिंग अबाउट दुष्यंत आल्सो?
नो दुष्यंत आई डोंट नो, ही हैज नेवर सेड
बट
एनीथिंग।
निराला एंड
लेकिन
महादेव वर्मा, आई मीन दे आर रियली
दुष्यंत
नहीं,
तो बाद में
फिराक
रहे।
साहब बहुत बात किया है, नहीं फिराक साहब के यहाँ एक समावेश जिसको आप कहते हैं, इतना जबरदस्त एसिमिलेशन था साहब, इतना जबरदस्त एसिमिलेशन था लिंग्विस्टिक। फारूकी साहब को एक शिकायत फिराक से ये थी, फिराक को वो बड़ा शायर नहीं मानते शमसुल्लाह फारूकी साहब, और एक उनको भी नहीं मानते जिनका नाम नजीर अकबर आबादी है,
ये तो
और
ठीक
वो इस ये वो ये कहते हैं कि इनके बड़े मानने की वजह ये है कि इनको फारसी नहीं आती। लेकिन सवाल ये है कि फिराक के नज़ीर के यहाँ तो ऐसी फारसी आमेज गजलें हैं, भरी हुई हैं। तो बहरहाल उनका ये थीसिस काफी चैलेंज भी हुआ, और इंटरेस्टिंग थीसिस बहरहाल उन्होंने अपने सामने पेश किया था। तो कहने
लेकिन
का हमारे मतलब
अनीस साहब, ये क्या आपको ये नहीं लगता कि जिन्हें उर्दू में, मैं जानकार नहीं हूँ उर्दू पोएट्री का, लेकिन जो क्लासिकल पोएट्स के जमाने से आज के मॉडर्न और पोस्ट मॉडर्न जमाने का कंपैरिजन किया जाए तो फिलोसॉफिकल डेप्थ कम हुआ है, क्या आपको नहीं लगता?
मैं समझता हूँ योर रीडिंग इज टू ए लार्ज
बहुत ही
एक्सटेंट
सही बात है।
वेरी करेक्ट, लार्ज एक्सटेंट। देखिए मैं फिर से जा रहा हूँ सिराज की तरफ। सिराज कहते हैं गजल खबरे तहय्युर इश्क सुन न जुनू रहा न परी रही, और वो पूरी गजल उसी तरह की है। और वही सिराज दूसरी गजल कह रहा है, तुम्हारी जुल्फ का हर तार मोहन हुआ मेरे गले का हार मोहन। अब ये ऐसी आम बोलचाल की भाषा है, और दूसरी तरफ है खबरे तहय्युर इश्क सुन न जुनू रहा। पूरी गजल इतनी मुरस्सा है, इतनी फिलोसॉफिकल है, लेकिन फलसफा दूसरे वाली गजल में भी है, तुम्हारी जुल्फ का हर तार मोहन हुआ में। अब कृष्ण का जिस तरह से तो एक लेयर्स है उनके यहाँ। भाई वो सिराज तो बहुत अजीब और गरीब सूफी थे। सिराज तो औरंगाबाद के पहाड़ों में निकल जाया करते थे और नाखून से पत्थरों पे पहाड़ियों पे शेर लिखते थे, और लहू लहान कर लेते थे उनको, और लाके कोई घर पहुंचा देता था उनको कि भाई ये है, इनको जमा
आप
करिए।
लोगों को मैं एक सजेशन दूं कि आप अली सेठी को की जो गजल जो उसने गाई है, अरे
हाँ,
तैय्यद इश्क सुन,
वो
वो
तो
जबरदस्त गाई है उसने, उसको जरा सुन लीजिए।